We're here at East Tennessee State University at the George L. Carter Railroad Museum, and I'm here with Dr. Fred Alsop, who's going to give us a little bit more information about the museum. And what exactly are you building here?
Well, Rachel, you are in the middle of a railroad layout as part of the Carter Railroad Museum, and you're standing in a make-believe section of Johnson City in a freight yard that actually never existed, although everything around you will be to scale of historical landmarks that did exist. So we're in the fantasy part of the railroad.
Great. And who exactly is doing all the work here?
The members of the Mountain Empire Model Railroad Club basically have been the docents for the 4 years we've been open. We're having a birthday this month. And they're the ones that build the exhibits, maintain the exhibits, operate the layouts that you've seen in the other part of the museum. This is our newest part.
So this is all very, very large. Why is it this humongous?
Railroaders always want more space. And what we are doing, we are attempting to model layout that is part of history. And the history that it's mimicking is going from Johnson City, which will be in the windowsill over there to our left, all the way to the very back part of this room, which is 50 feet away, that will represent 33 miles of the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad that ran from Johnson City to Cranberry, North Carolina.
What scale is this to?
Scale is called HO scale. It means 1 real foot here would equal 87 real feet in the real world. So it's a 1 to 87 ratio. HO is a shorthand designation, which means half of O. And most people will recognize O scale without even realizing they do, because those are the Lionel trains that they got for Christmas that ran around the Christmas trees. So the little track that you see here out in front of you, like this track here, represents 4 feet 8.5 inches from there to there, which is the scale of a normal standard railroad track like the ones that run on both sides of our campus.
Gotcha. And why are you modeling this particular railroad?
This railroad was probably the most famous narrow gauge railroad in eastern North America. And by saying narrow gauge, I just showed you this is standard gauge, 4 feet 8.5 inches. The little locomotives that Tweetsy ran were smaller than standard gauge. They ran on a 3-foot wide rail, which was important in mountain railroading because you can make much tighter curves than you could with the standard ones, but it necessitated smaller locomotives and smaller cars.
Easier to maneuver that way, I
Exactly.
guess.
This part of the layout that you're seeing here was actually donated to the university, and it was the nucleus for building this to begin with. And all of what you're seeing going back through there stemmed from about 5 feet of track on that upper layer. It was the only narrow gauge on the layout. And we decided we've got some narrow gauge. Tweetsy was narrow gauge. We'll do narrow gauge. And it's one of those little ideas that has sprung into what you're seeing. So over the past year, we built all the wooden parts, which are called bench work. And now we're putting down road bed, which is the cork that you see like this that's exposed. And the next thing is to put the track on it. And a gentleman like Gary over there is busy adding the wires to the track because our trains run on electricity, not on steam generated from coal or wood. So we've got 250 feet of track. We have to have twice that much wire, 1 positive and 1 negative running the whole length.
What are some of the materials that you guys use to build this?
Well, once you get above the wood base, you get into a lot of different modeling techniques. The track itself comes in 3-foot sections for the most part, unless it's a specialty section of track like a switch or a turnout. And so we lay that on cork, and the cork helps to deaden the sound. So it makes things quieter as the locomotives are running along. But because it's raised 1/4 inch, it also is an imitation of the ballast, the gravel substrate that railroads are laid on that helps to keep them where they are, because they're not tied down to anything. It's all the rock around them that helps to hold them into place. Once we get beyond that, and it's hard to show you here because there's not much more than that, plaster cloth, sometimes laid over cardboard strips, Sometimes we use blue foam that's used in insulation in homes. It comes in various thicknesses from 1/4 of an inch to 3 inches. And those are cut and stacked to make the relief of the hills that we're going to have.
Great. What can you tell us about this particular part of the museum?
Well, this particular thing here is called a turntable. And you would find this at a service facility, so that you've got all these tracks radiating out from it. And there would be a building sitting over part of these tracks, often in a somewhat rounded shape called a roundhouse. And this is an easy way of not taking up very much space, but being able to put locomotives into various tracks. Instead of having to take acres and acres to get them onto it, you've got a little, like a Lazy Susan, except it holds locomotives that would turn them in the various positions they need to be serviced, either inside the building or outside.
So what exactly can you tell us about this control panel?
Well, everything works on electricity. And when we have lots of tracks going in lots of different directions, we have what are called turnouts, where there's a fork in the road, except it's a fork in the railroad track. But it's either going to the left or it's going to the right. And we have to know which direction the train is going to go. So we have each of those controlled by a switch that will send us left or right. So on this panel, first of all, you see lots of little switches that are toggles that we can throw. And there are lights on both sides of them. Some are red and some are green. Green are going to tell you that you're going along the main line. Red means you're diverting off to the other side. So once these are thrown from their neutral position straight up, either left or right, a light will come on and it will correspond to which way that turnout's been thrown. And all the little white lines that you see here represent a diagram of what the track looks like up here on top. So I can see where my train is, and I can follow these little lines and know if I'm approaching a turnout that I need to work. So I've got all these signals here, and you've seen them all over the place here. This looks like a lot of spaghetti underneath, because we've got all these wires hanging down that control every one of these. And as long as it's working right, it's great. But once we get one that's not working, it's a nightmare trying to find where we have to go. But these are the kinds of things that you don't notice very much because you're watching little trains run around through scenery. But you've got some engineer back here who's madly keeping up with those trains and making sure everything is thrown right so it doesn't come off on the ground.
Sure. About how many control panels do you have for this whole unit?
These control just the area we're standing in, nothing else. And you can see that there are 5 panels around here just to do that. Some looking quite complex like this one, some not so complex like this one that's controlling the very top part that you see up there. And I really can't see the track up there, but I can follow along here and see where my trains are.
Okay.
So it will take one person who's rushing around a lot to do this, or 2 people that are watching different parts of this yard to operate it. So when you have all of these tracks concentrated, it takes a lot of work because you've got lots of locomotives and lots of cars running around.
Sure.
When we get on the main line, we just got one little track that's going forever. Not a big deal, but here it is.
Gotcha. Great. And what can you tell us about this back structure back here, as well as this bridge?
Well, bridges are things that model railroaders really like, because it means you've got some kind of chasm that you're crossing. Either you've got a water crossing down below, or you're crossing a road. You're doing something that has to have the train elevated. And the folks who build railroads, the rail ones as well as these, want to keep everything as level as you can. You don't want to have much of a hill for trains to go up, because that limits how many cars they can pull. So to get from this point to this point, we've got a nice bridge that's built like the prototype. So it's got all the little nuts and bolts in it. It's built exactly as an engineer would have built the real one, because we're trying to mimic here what really happens out in the real world. But railroaders love bridges. It's nice to watch your train go across a bridge. It's much more exciting than the monotony of it seen here or over on the other side where it's on very firm terra firma. There's something flimsy and adventuresome about a bridge that you're crossing. Cool. So we put in as many as we can.
Gotcha.
Way back up on the top, all of this wall is going to be a mine. And what you're seeing here are 4 little chutes in each of these where cars would come in with ore, or they would come in with some heavy material like a load of coal, and it would be sorted up here and dumped in, and then once refined, dumped into hoppers down here below. So this is a way of getting up to the top of the stairs to dump something down to the bottom of the stairs. So we'll have trains coming in from way away that will stop here, drop things in, and they'll be loading other cars here.
And what exactly were the hoppers?
Hoppers, I can show you a hopper. This little car represents a hopper, and in miniature, this is HO scale. It represents what's called a 2-bay hopper, which means it's got 2 sets of doors at the bottom. So it's easy to fill it from the top. We could run it under our chute over there, or we could fill it in some other means. And we put something that's bulk in here, like coal or dirt or stones. And when we get to our destination, the problem of unloading the car is easy because then you open doors at the bottom. It's got sloped sheets inside, like a sliding board, so everything by gravity is going to slide down and come to the outside. And all the markings on the cars are prototypical. It even tells in tons how much this car would carry, and it carries 110,000 pounds or 55 tons if it were a real one.
Cool.
But that's a hopper.
So earlier in the day, we looked at some of the buildings in the other wing of the museum, and the details are just phenomenal. What exactly is the deal with this right here?
I thought you'd never ask. As we've already seen, we're building a layout here, and there's no real scenery on it yet. But we need to know, as we place the track, where there are buildings that are really important, where they're going to go. And the easiest way to do that is to take cardboard and mock up the building with a footprint that, to scale, is exactly the size that the finished structure is going to be. It lets us make sure that we're lining all the roads up right, that all the track is going to be right. It gives us some idea how much space it's going to take up. This particular one, if you're familiar with East Johnson City, if you go out to Legion Street, where the Legion pool, the city pool is, and where the Cardinals play their baseball in the summertime, the red building that sits on the opposite side of the highway on the west side has been there for over 100 years. And it's the original engine house for the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railway. This cardboard mock-up is going to be that building. And when we get it finished, it will look just as realistic as the ones that you saw over on the other side.
Cool. Is there going to be a pool too?
There will be no pool.
No pool.
I'm standing in the pool.
Okay. It's right there. Are there any other cardboard markups here that you can tell us about?
Yeah, we've got one when we get to Cranberry. When we travel on our little Tweetsie 33 miles, I'll show you the engine house that was at Cranberry, because we've done a mock-up of that one as well.
Great. So why exactly would you have a narrow gauge railway instead of just the standard gauge?
Standard gauge is good all over the country, but it's not very good in the mountains. When you get into mountains, you're often following terrain that has tight twists and turns in it, often following river valleys that have cut through. And the big standard gauge locomotives and their big cars and their wider track don't make those nice narrow turns. And so when railroads were built in the mountains, whether they were temporary or more permanent, they often were narrow gauge, and they could be as narrow as 2 feet apart instead of the standard 4 feet 8.5 inches. Tweetsie was a 3-foot narrow gauge. So when we talked about what gauge we're modeling in a while ago, and I said HO, which is all of this out here, the Tweetsie part of it is HO, meaning it's still 1 foot to 87, but it's HON for narrow 3. So it's an HO gauge, narrow 3 foot. And this piece of track looks bewildering at first because it's got 3 rails on it. And the outside rails are standard gauge. The inside rail, along with this outside rail, now is a 3 foot. So our little Tweetsie locomotives and their cars could run on the narrow gauge part, and those locomotives were able to pull bigger cars if it was down here on the flat. And so they could pull the standard gauge car on the same track. And all throughout Johnson City, and all the way to Hampton on the other side of Elizabethton, where it was still relatively flat, they ran what's called dual gauge. After that, they hit the mountains and it all became narrow gauge. And the covered deck bridge is pretty interesting. It led into the very first tunnel on the Tweetsie Railroad. And the covered deck bridge actually had this shape. So this is the shape of it. There's going to be a river down here, and there's going to be the old highway from Elizabethton to Hampton that runs under this end. We know what it looks like from photographs. And right here is a picture, and here's another one of two slightly different views. The one on my left hand, you're looking at the bridge from the side, sort of like we're looking at it now. This one, in my right hand, you're looking down to the top of the bridge, as if you were over here at my elbow. And it's going this way, and it goes to a slight right-hand turn, and then it goes into a tunnel. You see the black hole? This is the old road down underneath, and the new road, if you went to Hampton, is just now being cut. So this bridge, a deck bridge, means you go over the top of it. A through bridge means you go through the inside of it. Now a lot of bridges on highways are through bridges because you've got all the superstructure on the sides and over the top. So Tweetsie had both kinds, some that they went over the top if it was convenient, some that they went through. So we're going to model one of the most famous bridges on the whole Tweetsie line. Now this whole track is supposed to represent 33 miles, but we don't have any kind of space like that in this museum. But what we can do, every bridge is going to be the scale length, just like the real one was, except it's 1/87th of the real size. And we'll go into a tunnel that is exactly the length of the first tunnel. And Tweetsie had 5 tunnels, so this says tunnel number 1. This is where we're starting. And when we come out, we're going to be over in Hampton, going through the other bridge that was the most famous one. It was a covered bridge. And we've got some photographs of the way that looked too. But it was a bridge, like the covered bridge that is still in Elizabethton. That was the old highway bridge, so the train went through.
Cool. When do you think that this whole project will be completed?
Tuesday.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, but I just want to make sure.
If we can, we are going to have track on here and trains running probably by February or so. The scenery is going to take a lot longer.
Sure.
But it will be a step at a time. We've got the bench work done. We're now putting the track down. Gary was doing the wiring that you saw a moment ago. And once we have it all wired and we test everything and everything runs, then the scenery comes next.
Cool. We're going to have some bears like in the other one?
There's always bears.
Always some bears. All
yeah.
right.
The mountains, my goodness, we got to have bears.
Can I see? Yeah.
Rachel, this bridge at the bottom with the train going across the top is the one that we're modeling that's just behind me. So that's the way it's going to look when we get it finished. And the one with the open chasm at the top is the covered bridge. And it's a through bridge. Trains going through it instead of over the top. Where this one, you can see the tracks on the top, and it's a deck bridge.